we've neglected is our web applications. Both our XP and Ubuntu systems have a web application, or they at least have a web server. So we'll look more at web application work later on in the course. We have a custom web application on Windows 7, whereas both of these are just going to be more like off-the-shelf kinds of web applications. But we should see a fair number of these, particularly internally. I see a lot of Tomcat, like JBoss, Cold Fusion, things like that lying around, like HP web management or light management or all sorts of power management kind of home pages. Like just a lot of things that have web interfaces as part of the software, that it's not its full function. Like we have XAMPP here and like Tomcats and things. They're web servers, but sometimes you just see stuff that it's just a web server functionality for whatever's running that may have some bad configuration settings that give us access. We particularly like stuff that lets us upload code and run it, or like gives us access to a database or something like that. Like we saw that MySQL database is running on XP, but we don't have access to it if we actually try to talk to it. So we try and do MySQL host is 192.168.1.76. Not allowed to connect to this server. We saw it came out in map and said it was unauthorized. We're actually not allowed to connect to it, so it would be nice if we could. Maybe we'd be able to see interesting data, or better yet, run commands on the system. So maybe there's another way, who knows. But let's take a look at our two web servers. I mean, always just browsing to them would be a good idea. So like we saw, this is XAMPP 1.7.2. Nmap found that with the scripting engine. So that doesn't look particularly interesting. It's like a splash page. But a couple things that you always want to check for with XAMPP. And of course this is going to be XAMPP specific, but if you come up with Tomcat or like JBoss or something, there's again like certain things you can look for. It's really like open access and the ability to upload stuff. If we can upload files to it and then execute them to the web server, be it like Java files or PHP files. Like this would be PHP, but say like Tomcat or JBoss would be Java. But if we can't upload like a WAR file and execute it, that would be awesome as well. So you may find something like that in some of your environments. And again, access to backend databases. So we have possibly the ability to upload files with XAMPP. It may have WebDAV enabled, and it looks like there is a WebDAV test page here. So a tool I like to use to talk to WebDAV is called Cadaver. So I want to talk to Windows Box WebDAV. Oh, it helps if you spell cadaver correctly. Cadaver. And this one does require authentication. Like IIS, older versions of IIS would like have open WebDAV that caused a problem. This one does actually have credentials. So it does require a username and password, but on setup it doesn't actually ask you to set one, so it may have a default. We could ask it. Let's see. So this is XAMPP 1.7.2 WebDAV credentials. I never spell credentials right. Oh, I did. Exploit XAMPP with Metasploit framework. XAMPP WebDAV upload.php. So it looks like weak WebDAV passwords on XAMPP servers. It uses supplied credentials to upload a PHP payload and execute it. So it looks like there's a Metasploit module trying to do what we're trying to figure out if we can do. So if this does indeed work, we can find credentials. We might could use Metasploit for it. Or we could do it manually. Nothing like celebrity ads. At least it's not for Viagra, right? But does it say what the default are? I wonder if the Metasploit module says. let's see, it looks like in the Metasploit module it has defaults in here, like rpass it says is XAMPP and ruser is WAMP. So I wonder if that's the default. No reason not to at least try it. So it says the username should be WAMP, password XAMPP. Well, that seems to have worked. We're now logged in. So we should be able to use this to upload files, potentially even code. Again, XAMPP is going to be PHP based, so we'll want to create PHP payloads as opposed to like Java war files if we were working with Tomcat or JBoss. But we'll see if that works in our exploitation phase. So potentially we have access here, and it's a weak password issue, a default password issue. I can see that very, very often, and it's often a good way to get a foothold in the environment. Let's exit out of here for now. So another thing we might want to look at, see if there's a phpMyAdmin. So phpMyAdmin is going to be for the database, and it should require credentials. Unfortunately, on some XAMPP versions, it didn't by default require any credentials. There wasn't even a default. There's just nothing. It's open. It says your configuration file contains settings root with no password that correspond to the default MySQL privileged account. Your MySQL server is running with this default is open to intrusion, and you really should fix the security hole by setting a password for root. Unless you know about this or want to spend the time to read the manual when you install something rather than getting started on your coding, chances are you're not going to bother to do so. So this actually gives us access to that MySQL database that we were previously unable to connect to. Just go to the SQL tab here and run any SQL queries we like. So it's like, oh, it's secure because nobody can attach to it but the local host. Well, that's all well and good, except we have this phpMyAdmin that's open to the world. Oops. That's definitely something we'd want to look at. Unfortunately, we're going to have to figure out how to do SQL queries, which I didn't pay too much attention in database classes, so I generally have to Google these, but we will find something that works and run it. So that is pretty cool there. So even though there's not really a website here, we found two ways that might be interesting to us here. So let's take a look at the Linux host. It works! The default install page for Apache. That's all exciting, but it's just a page that says it works. Good luck trying to exploit that. I wonder if there's anything like lying around here. I wonder if it has phpMyAdmin. No. I wonder if it has WebDev. Tomcat? No. So I could just keep guessing, or hopefully I would come up with the grand idea that maybe I should use a tool to do this. This seems like an ideal thing for a tool to do, kind of like brute force off a word list potential directories. One tool for doing this is called dirbuster. Dirbuster does have a GUI. So our target URL is 192.168.1.80. So our Ubuntu system, do need to give it word list, user, share, dirbuster, whoops, should have a default word list in here. Which of course, we'll look at password testing, but you can always put in your own word list if you want to. Directory list 1.0. Let's just do this small one. See if it finds something. So this is always something worth looking at, because it does specifically look for directories that are potentially hidden. Another tool I like it finds like defaults like icons and stuff. Another thing that's like, if somebody ever finds a way to use those to exploit something, they'll be very famous because it comes up everywhere. So it may or may not find anything interesting. Another tool I like for this sort of thing is something called Nikto. So all we have to do by default with Nikto is just give it a host. So what Nikto is going to do is it looks for, it's very similar to like Nessus for web applications, which against custom web applications makes it all but useless. But we'll see custom web applications later on. But against known applications, like it's looking for the web server in here, it can find known vulnerabilities. It basically has a database of known vulnerabilities and checks to find them. So whereas it's not going to find like SQL injection in your custom login page, it is going to be able to find if you have commercial off-the-shelf software, some open source software, which you do see a lot. I mean, people don't always write their own stuff. They use either free tools or buy something like for their wikis or payroll or timesheets or things like that. So, I mean, you'll often find things that are off the shelf. So it looks like this did find a few things. Out-of-date Apache stuff, the trace option, icons directory again, which Buster also find. Session ID without the HTTP only flag. I generally report on stuff like that, like missing the secure flag and HTTP only flag. On our cookies, that could potentially, in the case of like a cross-site scripting attack, be an issue. But what's most interesting here is this TikiWiki graph formula. So not only did it find something called TikiWiki, so it seems to have found our hidden directory, but it also found a vulnerability in that software. It says TikiWiki contains a vulnerability which allows remote attackers to execute arbitrary PHP code. So sure enough, if we take a look at TikiWiki, there it is. This is its version 1.9.8. And it says this is open source vulnerability database 4478. Of course, we can always go to the vulnerabilities repositories. That's exciting. It didn't take me to Google. You can see what my hosting provider is right now. So you've just gained information about me at the very least. Figure out where I live down to a certain extent. So yeah. Looks like they have Cloudflare. As well they should. I imagine they get attacked a lot since it's owned by the same people who make attrition. So some more information about this command execution flaw. So command execution flaws are always nice because we don't have to necessarily do anything like a buffer overflow, which is much more likely to cause a crash if it's just like an unsanitized parameter in a web application. Less likely to cause a problem. So that could be something we might want to attack. So again, we're going to look at custom web applications in the web application section. This is just kind of the web applications that you will run into, web application software like XAMPP or an add-on like this TikiWiki that may be subject to security issues that'll give you access to the systems.